Okay, so I guess the conversation really is about, or ought to be about, how to account for, I guess, the governorship election outcome in general, but more specifically, the outcome in Lagos. Um, I mean, it seemed like in the NSAS town, or in the kind of headquarters of NSAS, after a presidential election in which the Labour Party performed um, surprisingly well in Lagos, right, beating the APC, that the Labour Party governorship candidate would have had a better shot at the Lagos governorship election. But what happened in practice is that it was actually a thrashing, right? I mean, the Labour Party was defeated in a landslide in Lagos. Um, so how would we account for that? And then I guess how would we tie this to our broader preoccupations on this conversation, which is, questions of class and ideology? Did these things have anything to do with the Labour Party loss, the APC's victory in Lagos, or is it more classic than that? Is it the regular drivers of political outcomes that people tend to point to, for instance, ethnicity, um, etc. So I really wondered what you guys would think of this, because, yeah, so far the conversation, for instance, on Twitter or in a lot of the commentariat has focused on the normal drivers of election outcomes, as they've tended to be understood in Nigeria with the emphasis on ethnicity. So yeah, how are you guys making sense of the Labour Party outcome in Lagos and the governorship election more generally? I know, Emeka, you also probably want to reflect on Kano, but maybe we start with Lagos first. Thoughts?
I mean, for me, as someone who identifies with Marxism, it'd be difficult to analyze, as I'm sure as you guys know, to analyze elections from the ethnic religious standpoint. You know, um, and then personally, I'm someone who believes um, that our fault lines in Nigeria aren't ethnic or even religious. That what's really the case is that this is something which exists, but not to the degree that people want to assume that it does. It's something that the ruling class does exploit. Because if you look at Lagos, for instance, over two elections and the outcome, it's clear that for me, to me, in my own personal opinion, that the voters didn't go out thinking about, the ethnicity of the incumbent governor or that the ethnicity of, the most viable opposition. Neither did they
Mm.
even think about it in ethnic terms, at least not for the presidential election. You know, when the time in between, so during the time in between, what then happened was that the ruling class in Lagos, or the ruling party in Lagos, decided that they wanted to play on those existing divisions. And then it was, it was something of the theater of the absurd for, an observer like me, because you're now pushing religious arguments, religious ethnic propaganda, to do one over your main opposition, because this thing simply just didn't exist before then, or not to the degree that we then saw for the gubernatorial election. So you started to want to discredit the candidacy of the Labour Party candidate on the grounds that he couldn't speak the language, on all sorts of grounds. Whereas what really was happening was that these guys had realized that the stranglehold that they had on Lagos was beginning to whittle down. That's what the presidential election showed. Especially within the margins that they lost, so maybe 10,000 votes. All right, and then they resorted to all sorts of stupid propaganda, silly propaganda, in order to make sure that they shored up their own base. Okay, now as if that wasn't enough, not only did they show up their own base or rile up their own base with this kinds of sentiments, they then decided that they weren't even sure that that would work And then they then decided that for them to win the election, they had to go all out to suppress votes, in places where they felt that were the opposition strongholds. And I don't think that, what we've heard in the news is a fair representation of the scale within which what happened in Lagos, then did happen. So, I mean, for me as an observer, somebody who would take, historical materialism to the analysis of stuff, issues of politics, I do not think that Lagos is one example for you to use to push the argument that, ethnicity and class, ethnicity and religion play, form, the integral part of, how voters then vote, because I mean, that simply for me doesn't, there's no basis for that, not from the numbers, and not from even just observing how it played out in Lagos,
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How do you see
Yes.
that, OJ?
So yeah, so it's you're about the same point that I'm making is that the people that are not conscious, one, the underlying thing we have is this class that will use anything to hold or maintain their grip, their iron grip on power. So if it means resorting to like ethnic, problems, or even pushing the ethnic card or pushing religious card and all that, underlying we still have that class issue because the common man doesn't have that ability for that wide media spread, for mobilization of thugs, so for voter suppression and all that, So it's again the ruling class understanding that the contradictions of what they've done since 1999, especially in Lagos with the Tinubu camp or APC camp, that it's time that people are starting to realize that they can't continue to have that grip and they're looking in other directions. And unfortunately for them, they had to sink lower to this level of blatant backwardness in terms of using people's tribes or this thing. It didn't represent how people voted, but it's one of the tools that they used. So the ruling class is active in using that as one of the many, as accessories of their control of the people. The media is a very strong one, and even twisting historical facts, because they went as far as twisting historical facts, talking about the Labour Party candidates, parents, and maybe you couldn't speak Yoruba, all these kind of things that doesn't even matter in the context of, people's material lives and the betterment of, their lot. So it shows us that if we have this much control, if the elites or this ruling class in Lagos, if they had that much control and they were confident of themselves, they would have been sitting pretty as they did maybe in the last two election cycles with all that confidence that, now Lagos, nothing they happen. But for them to go and sink low into using tribe, into using religion, into doing stupid festivals, all this kind of bullshit, then it shows that they're not sitting pretty anymore. And that the people on whatever level have started achieving some level of consciousness that is shaking them up, at least, And we mentioned that state capture earlier, which Jamaica talked about in terms of the APC having that firm grip on Lagos. Now it's not there as such anymore. And don't forget that they've won the federal, so it has given them that confidence to be more brutish with the people in the gubernatorial aspect of the election. So that's what has kind of, buffed them off to do the nonsense that they did blatantly, during that gubernatorial election. So that tribal element, it's not to say that that's how people voted, but it is a tool that the ruling class uses and will continue to use to suppress people, So that's my own view, and that was what was nakedly exposed, on that Saturday, or when was that day that they voted?
Yeah, a couple weeks back now. I mean, but so then the question of how people voted still lingers. Because it seems like you're both saying that, okay, ethnicity came up in how the elites were trying to mobilize. but it doesn't necessarily help explain the outcome. So then what explains the outcome? I mean, if ethnicity is relevant but not essential, I guess, in the outcome, how would you then account for the outcome? Was it only a product of suppression, as Emeka was suggesting, or are there other factors maybe, leaving aside ethnicity and suppression, that seem to have played a role in the outcome?
Let me take a stab at this quickly, right? Because I think that this is something that some of us who are like-minded need. This is where the work actually lies. If you look at the margin, for the presidential election, you would say, oh, okay. I mean, the easy narrative is to say that the ruling party APC didn't quite rally its base, in the presidential election, and then they sought to do it in the gubernatorial election, which kind of explains why you saw the sitting governor going around licking ice cream, braiding hair, and all sorts of campaign gimmicks, talking to people and all of that, increasing salaries here and there, coercing members of the civil service and all of that. Now, so you could see, okay, that's how they showed up their base, and then they won the gubernatorial election, But you can't eliminate that aspect of voter suppression because, somehow the opposition party, or the stronger of the opposition party, couldn't actually then show up its base. Now, this is an argument that is very, very strong and that I have heard. In the aftermath of the presidential election, what the Labour Party resorted to doing, or supporters of the Labour Party resorted to doing, even though they had won the election, was to say that they were rigged and that their numbers were more. I mean, these things are now in a matter of the court. We would find out. We would know. And if that is true, to what extent, right? But you see, editing an election that you won, especially in the local context for the state level, what that meant was that even your own base going into the gubernatorial election was like, okay, even though we voted and they still rigged the election, so you kind of weren't playing to your strengths, which was that there are 6 million voters in Lagos State, and that in the presidential election, just 1,300,000 voted, and that there was a large chunk of the electorate that weren't even motivated to come out and vote. So where the narrative should have been, oh, see how slim the margin was with which we won, we could do actually better if more people then came out. You then went back to saying, oh, okay, you guys, they cheated us, and then the electorate had better use of their time, which isn't to negate the suppression itself, okay, which I mean was very, very, very disgusting to see, to even watch, to hear about, okay. But why I talk about Kanu sometimes and what the Labour Party could learn from Kanu is that this is almost what played out in Kanu 4 years ago, all right, between the NNPP and the APC, and then in this election cycle, both at the presidential and the gubernatorial in Kano, which NNPP won, they were not going to have any of it. In fact, whereas in Lagos, the turnout for the gubernatorial election was less than the turnout for the presidential election in Lagos. In Kano, the reverse was the case. So the turnout for the gubernatorial election in Kano was much more than the turnout for the presidential, which was that just was a pointer to where their real interests as NNPC supporters, lay. I mean, or lies, I don't know which
I get you.
of that, is correct. So while it's pretty mainstream to talk about, the suppression in Lagos. The work that people like us need to do is to point Labour to where they had their own flaws. Because for Christ's sakes, there were 6 million votes there to take. And then the extent of suppression, even the chances that it would work, if that's the go-to of the ruling party, would have been much more difficult if there was a much higher voter turnout.
Well, the truth is
so
that
you can't have
where you have suppression is where there's a minority.
Yeah. So
suppression already concedes that you're in the minority.
Yeah. So you can't have. You once you have numbers at polling units, then suppression actually becomes really, really difficult.
Exactly.
To execute, and that's the lesson from Kano.
Exactly. You're so right. I mean, if there is, in a condition of mass mobilization, where the 6 million people who were sitting at home were inspired to come out, those thugs would have run away. Why? Because it would have meant that you had more thugs than them, quote unquote thugs. And I want to come back to the thugs question like we did with NSARS, because, thugs, I think, is a loaded term that has a certain class implication as well, right? But I want to stay a bit on the question of like the various reasons for the outcome, and I think you've gotten a lot more specific now, Emeka, in your analysis when you're talking about the question of turnout and the difficulty of variation with Kano, which suggests that maybe there was more to it than just the question of the forms of mobilization by the ruling party and, the response of kind of non-state actors or people, people bringing in violence. Like maybe there was more to it. I mean, one obvious aspect, right, is that people were Labour Party fans were probably, there was a lot of disillusionment after the results of the election itself, right? The presidential.
Yeah.
So people probably went home. But wouldn't you say, going down the path that you've laid out, wouldn't you also say that for people to have responded that way to the presidential suggests that, by and large, I mean, the supporters of Labour saw the primary goal as getting into Aso Rock, meaning that all the down ballot races, by and large, the governorship races, the House of Reps races, etc., were just not considered that seriously. So couldn't we say then that, I mean, within the kind of emerging oppositional tendencies, that there's still a kind of overemphasis on the center?
That might be. And of course, we need, with this new constellation of how labor came and the OB phenomena, how it came into being, we have to also know that, they need a bit more time to organize and look at where their strong points are. Because if not, if there's no real political orientation for their people and their supporters like that, then things like, what you mentioned in terms of how the presidential election played out would, do a number on them and then they will just go back and sit back in the house, And it means that there's now real work set out and cut out for Labour if they're going to be the real opposition, not that flash in the pan, to actually concretize on the gains of this election, and build something more solid. Without that, they're going to just have, a wobbly base, which will just die out. If the ruling party or the ruling class continues with their more violent forms of suppression, so they need to know that they are biting hard on something which they shouldn't let go. They have the potential now, and it's something that they should work on. That's what I see from that, so that's it. What do you guys think?
I think, so if there's a critique of Labour to be made, would be pretty much in the same vein as the critique of NSARS, right? Which basically goes back to, much as I hate to say it, the left's abdication of its own role. What's pretty evident in Labour's reaction to the outcome of the presidential election is that there's, for all intents and purposes, the lacking of there's an ideological gap there somewhere. And this is something that the left, if it were existent, would have played a major role in shaping. Let's even look at the argument that Labour, especially in Lagos, put forward, which is state capture. All right. To an extent, yes, they got it, but they couldn't unpack it. They couldn't unpack it in a way that would rally the base, of their own support. They couldn't unpack it in a way that would have gotten the so-called thugs on their own side.
Right.
Okay. If you look at the economy of Lagos, you would see, and this is very discernible, that the people who control Lagos, the people who have captured Lagos, don't contribute up to 10% to driving the economy. And that these people can be found in 3 different sectors, or demography, if you like. The transport unions, the transport sector, the obas, the traditional houses, right? And the public administrative system in Lagos State, with the help, of course, of some financial institutions. That's how the capture of Lagos works. It meets any sort of, no matter how hard that stand, that is what I found missing. Ideological gaps within Labour, such, that it was possible for the APC propaganda, to be able to have, pretty damning effect on turnout. Because if that had been there, then it would have been clear to everybody who was a supporter of Lagos that, since we are now fighting, since it's pretty apparent to these guys that we're now close from rescuing the soul of Lagos, these guys have now come up with their usual tricks. But that what matters is simple, right? The transport union collects in Lagos State hundreds of billions in tax. In fact, it's not even, it is tax farming, if that's what you want to call it. The real estate in Lagos, courtesy of land-owning traditional families in Lagos, have sold up almost all the lands to migrants, right? And that it is that family, those families that are in cahoots with the Lagos State government, who also do the administrative work at LG local government level, at the level of the civil service. We saw people who were supposed to be civil servants, people who were in charge of agencies, ministries, departments in Lagos come on television and endorse the candidacy of, it's sickening, what happened in Lagos, but you can dwell on that and then avoid the much more difficult, conversation about how do you repel this? How do you prepare yourself? They've declared war. So, what you need to...
I think it's a really fascinating angle, really breaking down the basis of APC support beyond ethnicity. Because, I think that, I don't know how much, ethnicity adds to the ultimate vote turnout the ultimate vote margin for APC in a Lagos election. Probably something, but I think the core of it is what you're describing when you talk about the transport unions, the civil servants. You talk about traditional, aristocrats, which I guess ties to ethnicity. I would also throw in the market women's associations or market associations, which are contested,
right
but historically APC has a very strong tie to them. So then, isn't it ironic that we're talking about various unions, right? Transport union, civil servants who are unionized, market women's association, which is show kind of informal sector union, on the one side, which is the ruling class side, in theory, and then on the labor side, there's no organized social base, because even the NLC in Lagos endorsed APC, if I remember correctly. So are we
Yeah,
on the right side of history if it's APC that we're giving,
So,
if it's Labour that we're giving advice to? I mean, shouldn't we really be giving advice
yeah,
to
see,
the APC
now,
people who actually
which
seem to be closer in a way
which is
to
why
the
I'm
working
saying. I
class
mean,
and lumpen?
this is the problem. Like, it is the folly of how the movement take come together in the first place. That
Mm.
lack of ideology, that's what is going to be the Achilles heel of the Labour Party movement.
I would say, by the way,
Because
that
if
I
we're
don't
going to
think it's a
go,
lack, but I'll let you finish.
well, okay, well, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying because, of course, we can understand the progression of how even their candidates, everybody take come. That's why I used the word the constellation. How the movement came to being, it totally did devoid of ideology.
Mm.
Because if anything has to do with ideology, people like Obino go there in the first place. And that thing, now, like, say everybody just there in euphoria of the moment. That's why the analysis is not complete, and the ruling class can now pull on items and aspects of the superstructure, which it's obvious to everybody in the first place that they control. They control the market unions, they control the civil service, they control the media. I mean, we weren't getting alternative views
they
at
don't
all.
control, but sorry, they don't control, but keep going. They've
But they
captured
have
it.
quite
Okay, well,
It's
the
not.
hey,
majority of
that's
the
what I'm saying.
influence.
If you don't capture
Yeah.
something, it's like
Yeah,
They
them
have the
they
now.
largest
captured it.
influence.
You know that kind of
Yeah,
thing. So this
Yeah.
this architecture that they now have full grasp upon, they are weapons against people to even make proper choices at all,
Yeah.
and they won't refrain from using that even during election day. Me, I don't have any faith in even going to court. It's a waste of time, trust me, because these guys, they control the courts, the judges, all these people. Not be them, they buy them jeeps and all that. So you think they're going to go ahead and say they're going to declare anything? Even non-state actors, use of violence, these guys control it, such
Yeah.
that every aspect of society that you can pull upon to give you anything fair in terms of judgment, in terms of, the attributes that the so-called democracy is supposed to have, it only taken away from us already. So
Yeah.
what options do you have left on the table? And they won't hesitate because they know that they control these things. They blatantly rub it in our faces. They will use the violence, knowing that nothing will come out of it. They will use media, knowing that nothing will come out of it in the most stupid way. You see civil servants or people going on TV saying anything just to uphold that system now. So again, that lack of the duty or that lack of action with the left they take, now the way the left no, I be that action with the left no
Yeah.
take, or their absence. That's what is putting us in this running around, like what they call that carousel. We just go around and round, back to the same square one, without
Merry-go-round.
any real political advancement. Merry-go-round, yeah, without any real concrete political advancement. Because first and foremost, I made a tweet before the election that Labour is going to cry foul because one, they never get the power, the money to mobilize violence. They don't have those two, violence, and then they don't have the money enough. And again, Labour, we suppose they're socialist oriented. Where the left people they,
Well,
they are, and the thing that, let me just, I get very emotional and I do,
no, run am,
is
run
that
am.
you waste the
shall not
people's
cry.
time. I know go cry, no worry. They waste the
But
people's
there's some
time because
people in Nigeria, they are
what it
bakers, they
does
don't
to
have an
us,
oven. So there are
yeah,
reasons to cry.
what it does to us, man, they don't have an oven. I mean, what it does to us mentally is that people lose, that fighting power. People get disenfranchised. They don't want to fight anymore. They're tired. They will just put their hands up. Well, now them go do anything where they want to. So even where we feel, say, elections, that easy access point of mobilizing people, we left is where we feel, say, okay, more we even use election as mobilization to. We are also going to lose that one because people go feel, say, they work again.
I mean,
So it pains or it's a loss.
let me chip in here. Sorry, right?
All right, later.
Lest we run away with this idea that they control it, right? And then the way to come at this, I mean, from my own perspective, would be to look at this thing sectorally. So when you look at the real estate industry in Lagos, for instance, Baba, we all day street. We know one of my biggest critique of employment or unemployment or the workforce, especially in Lagos. So something that's very easy to spot in Lagos is the number of people who claim to be what do they call them? Those
Real estate agents.
Estate
people in Lagos.
managers, I mean,
Developers. No,
Yeah,
developers.
real estate.
developers.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, not developers. Developers is
Agents of
yeah, the agents, the food soldiers. So there's a property to sell in Lagos, for instance, cost 100 million. There are like 50 people with a marketer, and then they need to share 10% there. 10% of 100 million, where 50 people will share. Think about it for a minute, right? Meanwhile, the 90% where they on top, now the Obas them, and whatever they pay for tax, and all of that to the Lagos state government, So when you say they control it, the job of Labour or any other serious party for that matter is to explain to those 50 people how they are being ripped off. And that's just or how they're being used. And that's just in the real estate sector. When you come to the transport unions or the transport industry, now the MCO Luomos, where they head NURTW, they collect the bulk of the money. Then the goods are usually suppressed. Okay, I don't see them being. I don't really see that. It's a control thing. It's more like a capture thing. And then they then use togs. So I think we need unpack this capture thing and we need to break it down, make it tight enough so that even the blind can see how it works. Because it's not just enough to say it in academic terms, and then write about it, and you haven't done the real job of breaking it down so that every
problem
public
now
can
is
can see.
If ideology featured in the Labour Party's assessment and coming together of this movement, Obi no go dey where in dey. It's flawed already from the beginning. That's what I'm saying. And if you have a Labour Party or a Labour movement that is devoid, that is supposed to be of socialist origins, that doesn't make that its foundation, then where do you want to even start with educating people with how they are exploited using the superstructure of society, using these things that you've mentioned, using real estate agents, using practical day-to-day things. You allowed a bunch of millionaires to just come together and come and say they are the candidates. How are you going to explain how those guys got their wealth?
OJ, I agree with you, but if Obi wasn't on that ticket, Labour also wouldn't be where it is today.
Of course, I understand. So you don't see the contradiction now. The contradiction now.
You need money to prosecute elections.
So the contradiction there now is that we have this is the work that is cut out for Labour now. If he wants to wear the garb of that real opposition where he be now, then it is time to work and start going to school. Let's start schooling the people.
But I mean, the kind of work that people decide to do depends on what they think is needed. The lesson they learn will condition, is what you think the problem is that will condition the solution you pursue. And the problem that is being analyzed is the use of thugs and identity. So you hear a lot of people saying, we don't learn the lesson now. It means that next time we have to lean into trying to beat them at their own game, so to speak. Right? That's one thing.
No, they learned it from the presidential side.
Absolutely.
And they thought that the response to it was to go and hire bouncers.
Or bring your own private security. Which also goes back to the NSAS thing. And there's a class question here that we're not talking about. But before we get to that, I mean,
I don't say you go good yet. I don't say you go. You don't. I don't serve them up now. Make you flog them with cane.
So I think the situation is a little worse than you're describing, Oichi, where you're like, there's an absence of ideology, so that's why they wouldn't, despite the name Labour, be able to educate workers about the nature of their...
No, I'm only towing what Emeka said in terms of, how do we now go to work?
Why do I know where Said is going with that?
No, but the thing is that...
No, my side now say ideology day. Yeah, and
No,
they do
but
wetin they suppose.
part of
No,
the
no, no,
reason
but not
why
the way things
people
like they go.
support Obi is because they give shishi. Am I lying? Part of the reason why some of those
No,
youths in Lagos
that's
support
what they
Obi.
say.
Yeah,
That's what they say. That's
and
what
part
they
of the
say.
reason
But
they
I don't
support
think
him
that
is
that's why
like,
they support him.
okay, they believe that, people who read Stairs, people who started a tech company, people who run a business in Lekki believe that Buhari administration was not favorable to entrepreneurial youths, but Obi administration will be favorable to entrepreneurial youths. Why? He will reduce the scope of government.
It's
He will provide more of an enabling
it's the
environment for
idea that
them.
he represents. You're right.
So these are not empty things. These are not ideologically neutral things. And the thing is that what will his not giving Shishi do? It will mean that it will force the so-called thugs or people who are waiting around for handouts to go back into the economy and fight for jobs, to not be quote unquote lazy, right? To not be waiting around for Shishi. I mean, if you call this the absence of an ideology, then what is ideology? I mean, what can be more kind of compelling than that in terms of a framework for understanding the problem in society and the solution for it, you know? So I guess what I'm saying is that it's even a little worse than a situation where it was just people without visions who are just waiting for a generic moral messiah to come and help them out. I think it's a little
And
more,
now,
the condition is a little more advanced than that because
what I
it's
think
people with a fairly specific vision of where they think society should go who have chosen somebody who they believe shares that vision.
on the other side, this
Would you
what you're
be speaking?
saying.
Would you be speaking? Would you be speaking in general terms, Said? I mean, because I hear what you're saying, but what I don't think I understand is whether that paintbrush is something that you would use to tar the whole.
Emeka, I'm walking along with you on that.
Movement. Okay, so
Yeah.
this is about to finish. It says less than a minute, so I have to stop this
All
one
right. Okay.
right at
Okay.
America's question, and then let's just log back in and conclude. I think, okay, what I'm hearing you got, what I think we've established now is some of the social base of APC, which is part of what made the party win again in Lagos. So I guess it's social base primarily in Lagos, which, like I was saying, ironically includes a lot of sectors of the organized, informal, and working class, which I will grant is more of a cartelized version of an alliance with working class, depending on this kind of hierarchical leadership, like people like MC Oluoma, market women's leaders that can whip people into line, than it is a bottom-up democratic working class alliance with APC, right? Obviously. But I mean, it still strikes me as ironic that Labour seems to have a base that is much more, to put it frankly, like middle class and youth in Lagos, right, than it is a kind of working and informal sector, which is why the thugs are on the APC side rather than the Labour side, whereas the Labour people are hiring bouncers and, to protect them at the polling unit when they cast their votes. And I mean, I know it's easy to be a little facetious about that, but that's the situation we're in. Then the other aspect, so it seems like there's a kind of class component to that class difference in the way that the basis of the parties, social basis of these parties are constituted. And then the other thing I would add to this is ideology. OAG seeming to suggest slightly that the Labour Party is kind of ideologically barren, and this is part of why you could have an OB take power in the party and basically drive the party to its own ends, and is part of why also the party membership or people who are aligned with the party in this election didn't necessarily see it as their role to appeal to or include the segments of society that ultimately supported APC. But I'm saying that maybe that's less of a question of absence and more of a question of that Labour social base having its own vision of what society should look like, that is not primarily about the working class or market women or these segments of society that are absorbed into the APC machine. That it's one that is more so about a technocratic entrepreneurial middle and upper middle class, securing the gains that the middle class has made under the PDP administration, in that period of some kind of growth in the Nigerian economy that produced a kind of lecky class. That if the social base of labor is primarily about sustaining those gains or improving on them, expanding them, then that's not ideologically neutral at all. That aligns basically with what might be the most successful ideology of the contemporary period, maybe the most successful ideology in history, which is neoliberalism. So there's nothing blank about that at all. And it just happens to be that it's not a winning strategy, it seems. But I think saying that it's empty misses the way in which, it actually is opposed to the things you're saying it would do ideally. How would you respond to that?
Let,
Have I been too harsh?
let, let me, no, not at all. I mean, that's fair game. And let me respond to that. Yeah. All right. Let's say that, let's grant that ideologically, Labour Party as presently constituted isn't quite different from the APC, right?
I would even go as
And
far as saying it's slightly to the right of the APC, but we can
okay,
quibble over that in the comment
yeah,
section.
no, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, and that we have competing visions of basically the same ideology.
Yes,
All
exactly.
right.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, yeah, that's fine. Um, okay.
Progressive neoliberals versus middle class neoliberals or whatever. I don't know how you want to put it, but yeah, something like that.
Okay. Okay. Except that I don't see what's progressive about APC.
Well, it's the
They
P in
like
the APC.
they like to mouth that, but so here's the thing, right? We have two competing visions, okay, and both have mobilized, right?
Right.
The difference is that one has the instrument of state, and then the other doesn't, okay.
Mm,
And then we're going into an election to decide whose particular strain of ideology has been, or strain of vision has been bought into,
yeah.
right? It still boils down to, if you say that you guys are progressives and that your own vision of how to develop society or the state is that, oh, we just need to build the infrastructure, okay? We just need to collect farm tax and then build the infrastructure, and that the rest will take care of itself, and then people can compete based on the infrastructures that we've built, and then try and make ends meet or try and make something out of, for themselves out of
Mm-hmm.
what we have done. Okay, so we have the Lekki port, we're building rail that we have been building for 20 years, and we still
Mm-hmm.
we still haven't gotten around to it. And then some other guy comes and says, okay, you know what? This is not my own vision of how things should be. Yes, we should build infrastructure, but not at the cost of money in people's pockets. So instead of consuming, we want a situation where we can produce, so that people who are producing can then have more money in their pockets. And then we can also then, following that, farm tax them into bringing, getting money to build the so-called infrastructure, right? So one places infrastructure as the first go-to, the thing to go through. And the other one says, no, let's create a base, of wealth first, so that we can then, on those grounds, go and then farm tax off the people who have produced the wealth, right? Now, the election is to settle these competing visions. Why then go and suppress the votes of the people who you claim and don't have any ideology or don't even have any grounding ideologically? Because that's what the claim usually is within the APC camp. Why is it that, okay, we want to test our visions of society and which part of the electorate buys into it? So, of course, the other part to this is that there's a large base of the electorate who doesn't even buy into any of these visions, which
But
explains why.
that's the point. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the main point is that it's not so much to respond to or take on the APC's version of the argument, as much as to say that, like, look, perhaps, and this is responding to OEG, that perhaps the reason why LP was not mobilizing the workers is because that's not their social base. They don't consider those people to be their social base, right? So APC can continue to rely on its own minority of captured workers, and LP can continue to or attempt to rely on this kind of precarious middle class. And then it seems like the minority of captured workers will be able to deliver electorally more than this captured middle class with some, traders included can do. Why? Is
no, no,
because that these captured workers, A, as you said correctly, Emeka, have they're aligned with the party that has the instruments of state. But B, there are probably still more people. I mean, if if the election results are anything to go by to some extent, and then C, they
see,
can actually mobilize muscle. It
that's
means that they
fine.
have quote unquote thugs.
No, so you see, the true test of this, would be the polls, right? And the way to settle this conversation or this argument is to allow for a free and fair election. Why go? Because we have two outcomes within the same state, one for presidential and the other for gubernatorial. The outcome for presidential shows that with very little margin, say 10,000 votes, one vision of society has more people who have bought into it, no matter how slim, right? And then you saw this, you know this, okay? And then your response to this on the gubernatorial front is to deploy both the instrument of state and the full weight of thugs that you control or that you have captured, to suppress those who have bought into the other vision or the other competing vision of society. Really. I mean, I think it's clear from what we have been saying, amongst the three of us so far, is that we don't even have a dog in this fight, as it stands. But there's a moral question there, really, And then the more sickening part of it is that those who claim to be progressives really, have then decided to resort to silly, very stupid, very base, very primitive propaganda, in order to take the spoils of war.
Yeah. No,
It's,
but
I don't,
yeah,
I,
but yeah, I guess we're kind of stuck in those who claim to be
yeah,
progressives versus those who claim to be labor debate, which, like you say, I mean, is in truth we don't really have much of a dog in the fight. But I guess, yeah, I mean, where I was getting at is that what I was trying to say is that just responding to OEG again, saying that, well, the labor, the real electoral power of labor, including its votes, but also including its muscle, was left sitting on the table because labor as such was not appealing to labor. And that's where I was saying, yes, that's probably a little more intentional than it seemed, right?
oh,
Because
okay.
that's not their real constituency. So it's not that they just don't have knowledge or they haven't read the right books. It's that they've read the other books. Do you know what I mean, OEG? Like they believe the other stuff,
It's
the opposite of what you believe, not nothing. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So I mean, and I
so
think this
my
is critical
my
for the
own
left because if we keep assuming that the people that we're supposed to talk to are
so
tabula rasa and that is just ignorance,
my
then we're going to continue hitting our head against the wall because they are not tabula rasa. They have other ideas in mind.
so
They are not listening,
one
reading
point
Marx, but they're reading Robert Greene. They don't
so
like
one
Bernie
point
Sanders, but they like Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk. So that
one
doesn't mean that
point
they don't
so
have any ideas. It means that they just
one
have different
point
ideas than you. I mean,
my own is if something says it is one thing, if something says it is one thing, then it is not that thing. Then obviously something else got to enter with that, because
Right.
what I was saying, I say labor as it is, let's agree, say you no can get any socialist anything. That when I say you no get ideology, I mean say you no get socialist ideology, you no
Okay,
get
right,
anything
right,
to do with
right.
socialist. That's why they don't have any business with looking at the finer details, class, the who we go educate, how we go take mobilize and organize, all these kind of things. That's why they don't have any business with it. They're just looking at who they feel use push, and this is what you get, because you go on the cry foul. We know the state is a gangster entity. Why you
Abi.
going to cry, say they go use talk? It's what they must do to keep power.
Exactly.
In fact, if they don't do it, I'll be surprised. The state is the gangster element. The gangster
Right.
nature of the state will show in different ways. If not assassination, or if not they go do them to maintain that power.
Exactly.
So we
Exactly.
should not
Whether
be
they
crying.
claim they call themselves
Yes,
progressives,
that's what
even
they
if they
must
want to
do.
call themselves socialists, that's still what they're gonna
Yes,
do.
that's what they must do. So now is it in our own ignorance, saying our Labour Party now we go on the cry, say, oh, this one. If it's tribalism, they will use it. What are you going to do about it as people? What are we going to do about it as people? We say they fly the flag of Labour. So maybe we could know say too different from other political parties. Now power they find. Because if we are going to be educated about what we want, or the genuineness of what we want to, then this project must be whole. And we should start pointing our fingers at the aspects of society we go there in our way towards total liberation. That's my own point. Because where I'm also they use lead us to the point, say, let's people unmask waiting this new movement will be. So that we won't be, disappointed when things no go the way. They're
Yep.
supposed to use violence. They're supposed to use the thugs. They're supposed to use educational institutions. They're supposed to use the unions. They're supposed to use the civil servant. They control. If you say you capture something, you they control and be that. You capture tiger, put them for your neck. You put iron for your neck. You they control and be that. Now we
Yeah.
won't take commodity chain for our neck. Show us, say, okay, if you kink am from this part, or if you stab the hunter, we hold down for neck, you go feel free. You know that kind of thing. So they're not too interested in doing that. They just won't ride that wave, hoping say go give them the best of results. But unfortunately, the ruling class where they dominant, they show them how low they can go, and they go on the cry foul now. That's my own point. Like, I know that this LP or this new constellation, that's what how did it come together? If something don't come together to get better foundation, if it doesn't have a good foundation, then the cracks go show. Because how are you even going to be prepared? What's the nature of the enemy that you're fighting? Of course, they will use violence. That one is there. Lagos is brutal. Like, they don't turn everybody to Agbero finish. They don't turn graduate to Okada rider finish. They don't turn everybody. If you know if you do Agbero, if you know if you kiss ass, if you know if you get some kind violent tendencies, you know if you survive for Lagos. So because people want to arrest you, you want pack last one.
You see, this is the thing, right? I think where I'll start from to respond to OAG, and probably where I disagree with you a bit is this. I think we've established and we all agreed that we have competing visions of the same, neoliberal kind of
I don't disagree with it. Emeka, I don't disagree with that.
Let me
I
I
don't
know that
disagree with that.
yeah, I agree that you don't disagree with it. But I'm saying this.
Okay.
Right. I'm saying this is what I'm saying, and it's speaking to the control thing, right? In Lagos, not too long ago, some guy from wherever he came from came and then brought in a business called Go Okada, which employed thousands of people. All right. Okay. Now, these people have almost the same kind of vision with the ruling party in Lagos State, right? Now, in a bid to capture that business, that model of business, Lagos goes and brings all sorts of tax, brings all sorts of barriers to make sure that this business dies, right? And in so doing, put many people who previously were employed into the unemployed market. right? A Labour, with all its flaws, comes and speaks to its own vision of society. And these people who have been dispossessed, right? Even within the estate, the estate, real estate industry, with dispossessions of lands, these are things we have talked about, right? Buy into, some of them do, they buy into the Labour vision, right? And then these guys have all the right in the world to express their franchise during an election, and then you go and disenfranchise them. What has happened in Lagos is sickening. Fine, I don't probably have a dog in that fight, but I know where my sentiments lie, because I be human being as well, and then you don't go dig up sentiments when no even they part of waiting make them they vote against you in the first place. So you basically, as it were, as it is during the gubernatorial election, is still an election. Celebrate it, increase the salaries of your foot soldiers the next minute. Then, following that, you then begin to want to ask for tax for people where you disenfranchise from voting. So I don't get right to vote, but you won't collect tax from me. Come on, this is madness now.
Emeka, I think you think there's some line that these people won't cross.
These people cross the line. Did they have to cross that? Did they have to cross the line? If you're talking about competing
that's the point that
features?
I'm making. Yes, they will. Don't take it. Nothing is off the table for these bastards. That's the point that I'm making. If it's to use tribalism, if it's to kill people, they are going to do it. They are animals. To hold, and when do you even think they get active and talk to the people? If it's not only this time, once in 4 years. After this season, now inside convoy you go to see someone. You know, go follow you talk anything again. Now inside this convoy you go to see them. They only talk at the people self, and then they use their force on top of the people. And nothing is too much for them to do when it comes to grabbing and holding that power. And it gets stronger because
throw away that their nonsense progressives.
Yeah,
they just
but I also think that why they think of themselves as progressives is because they are more state-oriented. They're the more state-oriented neoliberals, as opposed to the more market-oriented neoliberals on the PDP side. And I guess PDP, in my mind, includes Labour and.
I just even think say nomenclature.
No. I don't think it is. I think that will miss a critical aspect of what is happening. And this ties back to what Emeka is getting at. I mean, one of these two groups is more likely to use the civil service, to use the unions, to use the so-called thugs than the other, And I think that's like crucial to understand. I would say that the thugs probably cut both ways. I mean, because when PDP was in power,
if you think about the PDP
was more market-oriented neoliberal. We still saw, extensive. In fact, the perfection of the use of thugs, you could argue, was under Obasanjo, who was a more market-oriented neoliberal. And Obasanjo, of course, endorsed Obi. So, and of course, Anambra State was no, elections there were not like. We're not the liberal cosmopolitan utopia either, right? So I guess if it's a battle between the state-oriented quote unquote progressive neoliberals and the market-oriented quote unquote progressive neoliberals, I think we can expect at least two things. One is that whoever wins, the left loses, and two, that in a state where the state-oriented neoliberals have also captured some of the key levels of power, it's very likely that you will see them use it to disenfranchise people. And so that's, their opponents. So maybe that shouldn't be as surprising to us, even if it's surprising
but it is dangerous. Yeah. It is dangerous. Whether we agree that we're surprised or not surprised by it, it's a dangerous trait. Because
very dangerous.
Yes, of course it's dangerous.
But what's more dangerous than violence? At all.
Yeah, what you hear these assholes in Lagos say all the time is that there's a need for continuity, right? But even more so that there's a need for the state at that subnational level to align with the national.
The center.
right?
Center.
Yeah, with the center. You know, there's a degree to which they couldn't perpetrate some of the things that we saw in Lagos for the gubernatorial election. Because even at that
presidential
level, it's no, at the gubernatorial. I mean, there were skirmishes at the presidential, but in Lagos State it was more at the gubernatorial.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say before moving forward is that lest we get criticized for focusing on Lagos, some of the same things played out in places like Rivers State and Enugu State that I'm sure about. All right. But you see, where the worry is that these guys now have the instrument of state. And that the father of all of this in Lagos State is now the president-elect. So if what we saw, and that's what it is a foretaste of what's going to happen, then it might as well be that we don't have a democracy again.
Okay, but because you think that we had a democracy before.
Thank you very much. Welcome home.
We don't even have a semblance of it.
At all. Never had. It's just that at times, as these things, they progress, it will just show as the contradictions get thicker, they feel the need to be more, to clamp down more and more and more. Now, the bare face of that thing don't show now. It's now glaring. That's why I tweeted that this system cannot carry itself forward. It's a mess. And now the winner, they take all. And when it comes to this electoral in quotes time, now you go see them, their fangs, everything will show. You see how beastly they can be, or bestial they can be. So that's it. And they don't show us now. They've shown us now. So how are we going to educate ourselves to know that these people are beasts? And how are we going to now appeal to our, progressive, a progressive class, where we say we go feel wrestle ourselves away from the hands of these people? That's the key thing. That's the key thing.
On that point of education, I think while we come maybe to the final segment of the conversation, I want to pose a question around what the left itself should learn from this electoral cycle. And Emeka has been alluding to this no, but he's been alluding to this when he's been talking about not having a dog in the fight or a horse in the race, whatever analogy you prefer. Because if you say that the election was really about, and I think we've all agreed on this, in a way, the Lagos election as a microcosm of the wider thing was about competition between a slightly more state-oriented neoliberalism versus a more market-friendly neoliberalism. If you can say that the election was essentially fought between those two groups, and we also admit that ultimately that fight, that axis of differentiation was not appealing to 75 at least percent of voters, such that for one reason or the other, they didn't even see the need to come and cast their vote. Then it means that the left is on the side of a majority of the people who found this election to be demobilizing or uninspiring. So what is the lesson to draw from this? I mean, should we join the fight of the state-oriented neoliberals versus the market-oriented neoliberals and try to carve out our space within that fight? Or really, should our fight be elsewhere with the 75% of people or so, 65 or however large, but the majority of people who are not even distracted or enticed enough by this narrow set of options to come out and vote? Or how do you see it? I mean, would you quibble with that framing? Or if you accept the framing, then what do you think is the lesson really for the left in an election like this?
The lesson for me, for the left, is first that the left needs to accept that it's a lazy bunch, spends a lot of time talking and
okay, fine. We've gotten our yabs in.
Next to nothing. Yeah, because one of the more endearing things that Labour has shown is that you can rally up a base in 9 months. The left has always had 4 years after each bourgeois electoral cycle to do its work, but won't do it. Right? But it would spend its time critiquing people who have done it. So apart from the fact that the left is lazy, it's also a hypocritical bunch, right? Which takes us back to where we were before the elections itself, where the argument in the left was either that you join the labor and seize a part of it and then build out from that. That's the interest perspective, right? Whereas one part of the left was, oh no, we should have nothing to do with this, guys. We should, start doing our own things, by ourselves, build a totally new party and all of that. Okay? You and I, all of us here are members of the left, or that's where our own allegiance lies, right? So this is us being self-critical of ourselves. We have 4 years to do what Labour did and NMPP, to a large extent, has done in about a year. Okay? So I'm hoping, against all odds, against what's reality, that in the 4 years that we have before the next electoral or the next elections, that we'll get off our lazy behinds and put in the work that is necessary to bet a formidable political party going into that election. Because the numbers, like Sahid has said, is glaring. There's 75% of the electorate who don't quite buy into these competing visions of the same ideology, right? And who probably don't even have any ideology by itself, But the job for the left today, I think if they should take anything, or if we should take anything away from this, is that we have our work cut out and that we should start doing more of the work than actually talking. I mean, I think that's, where to live for me,
Nice. Oji, how do you see it?
Yeah, I feel like the left cannot leave any terrain alone without participating. It must be in all terrains. Like, it must be out there organizing and mobilizing people. It must also get into, the field, because we have to be very, very, dialectical with our people, and we know, say, okay, now here we be as a people. As it be for one other place, if be like the same thing, we have to be live with our own analysis. Say, okay, if for now the people's minds open to the electoral process, let's get into the field there, carve our own space and do what it is. And while you're doing that, also let people know that these are the things that are on board, or this is how it is. We are only using it as a medium, as a vehicle. If we get through using this medium, fine, we'll start building and changing things, using that. And if not, we still day street. That kind. So yeah, the work day, seriously, is the serious work. If the Labour Party had been, at least place where we say left fee enter and take stronghold, then it could make the work very easy. But as things just it changed, but yeah, we can't leave any terrain unoccupied. We must be there. Maybe they say they carry something come now. We collect our gas there everywhere. Yeah, so gas there everywhere.
But does that mean we
If
gas
not-
there for inside the APC and PDP too? Because
No be the squabble. No.
If Labour Party
First
now
and foremost.
terrain for Labour struggle, then
No.
APC na
and
terrain
PDP
for
dey
progressive
different.
struggle and PDP na terrain for democratic
no.
struggle with that now.
First and foremost, the history and the heritage of Labour is something totally different from waiting these guys there about. Like, it's different. At least you didn't get purpose. There's a purpose to it. So we can always use that as a tethering pole to which the party and what we want to do is aligned with. Like, that's one key thing that, at least they get charter of demands. Get one charter, Labour getting one charter now. So come on. That's the starting point.
No be the party you get, I'm sure, na NLC, but yeah, I get your point.
The only thing I want to add, sorry, before Said, you chip in your final thoughts, you say, make the left also realize it. There's no point beefing capitalists and their money, because the money then they use to prosecute election. So definitely, all of this self-righteous critique of capitalism, the idea is to mass mobilize and raise enough funds.
You can't do much without money. The way the things are. You can't do much without money.
Make we not sit down, they talk, say,
no, we can't do.
we can't do
in
much without
billions
money.
enter Labour Party. Labour Party for no day where they day without.
We can't do much without money. We can't do much without money. But we can't cry foul when they lead the people astray and they don't know what to do next. So that's the thing.
The difference between Obi say then probably no reach 10,000 of them when they start. We donate money, but then donate those monies in millions. But the left will need 1 million, 2 million people. We go down, they donate in thousands, right? Where their power reach. But to get to that point, you need to work.
That's the thing. Like our work is cut out for us, but we can't put our eggs with the snake and think that anything good will come out of it. That's my own point. You know, we must be clear on where we stand. Even if we go with capitalists and so say, okay, now so we must know where we stand and come to, winning concessions really and getting what we want, basic necessities of people being met. And we can start from there as a solid ground. Nothing is really in black and white, but misleading the people and then make their hearts just they say, they in despair and they don't want to now participate in anything political again is a huge loss. Okay. That's my own point.
Well, I haven't heard you say that, OAG. I was just about to tear my Nigerian passport, but actually I won't tear it after all. Because...
my Nigerian passport.
No, because you're right. Maybe, in fact, that I shouldn't be demobilized, dejected by the situation, but it should actually be a call to action, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to leave it today, unless anyone has any parting thoughts.
People will not get passport like us. We want here.
Come on for there. You swear you.
Immigration office be that now.
I request I can give you your passport.